Officer Mark Reynolds was the kind of man who looked like he had his life under control. In his pressed uniform, with his polished boots and stern expression, he was the figure people expected to see in a place that prided itself on safety and order. Neighbors often waved when he drove past in his patrol car, and parents told their children that he was someone to respect. He embodied discipline and authority, at least on the surface. To most, Reynolds was a symbol of protection. But behind that polished exterior was a man who carried old resentments and views that were not spoken out loud in public, only whispered in the private corners of his mind. He had grown up believing he was superior to others, and though he learned how to wear the mask of politeness, his true opinions always lingered just beneath. The neighborhood where he lived was one of those carefully planned suburban communities, the kind with trimmed lawns, neat driveways, and the constant hum of sprinklers in the summer. Families moved there for peace, convinced that it was the kind of place where trouble would never reach them. The streets curved gently, lined with identical houses in muted shades of beige and gray, each with porches decorated with flags or flower pots. It was the sort of place where people knew each other's names, waved at mail carriers, and traded gossip in hushed tones. For years, nothing happened there that would make the evening news. Across the street from Reynolds, in one of the smaller but cheerfully decorated houses, lived Alicia Turner. She was 24, a nursing student full of energy and determination. Alicia had recently moved in with her aunt to save money while finishing her studies. She brought with her a lightness that contrasted sharply with the quiet reserve of the neighborhood. She smiled easily, played music softly while she studied, and filled the air with laughter when her friends came over. She was young and ambitious, balancing long shifts at the hospital with nights buried in textbooks. People noticed her not just because she was new, but because she carried herself with an undeniable confidence. For Reynolds, Alicia represented everything he claimed to despise, but could not ignore. In public, he was cold and distant, never engaging beyond polite nods. In private, however, he noticed details: her walks to the bus stop in the early mornings, the way she leaned against the porch railing to take calls, the sound of her laughter drifting through open windows on warm evenings. Each detail lodged itself in his mind, unsettling him. He had always been a man who thrived on control, but now he found himself fighting feelings he didn't want to admit. The neighborhood noticed too, though in a different way. To some, Alicia was a refreshing presence, a reminder that life wasn't all about routine. To others, she stood out in ways that didn't sit well with their unspoken expectations. They whispered about her, not unkindly at first, but with the edge of curiosity that can quickly sharpen into judgment. She was different, and in a community built on sameness, difference never went unnoticed. Reynolds kept his distance, at least in the beginning. He convinced himself that he was merely observing, maintaining the vigilance expected of a police officer. But deep down, the mask he wore, the mask of order, authority, and superiority, was beginning to crack. What no one knew then was that this quiet street, with its manicured lawns and calm facades, was standing on the edge of a story that would destroy the illusion of peace forever. It started as something so small that most people would have overlooked it. A glance across the street on a quiet afternoon, a moment of locked eyes when taking out the trash, a brief pause at the mailbox. For Mark Reynolds, those brief encounters with Alicia Turner became impossible to ignore. He told himself it was nothing, that she was just another neighbor, but deep down he knew he was drawn to her in a way that unsettled him. He had spent his life building walls around his emotions, hiding his prejudice behind a mask of authority, but Alicia's presence began chipping away at that carefully built facade. At first, the contact seemed harmless. A polite wave one evening, a muttered greeting when paths crossed on the sidewalk. Alicia, open and kind-hearted, never suspected the complicated storm brewing inside the man across the street. She treated Reynolds the way she treated anyone else, with casual friendliness and warmth. But in those fleeting moments, Reynolds felt something that both thrilled and frightened him. His desire grew, tangled with shame and anger, because it clashed with the beliefs he had carried for years. As weeks passed, the encounters stretched into something more. Late at night, when the neighborhood was dark and quiet, Reynolds found excuses to be outside at the same time as Alicia. A short exchange turned into longer moments until the line between neighborly politeness and forbidden intimacy blurred. In the secrecy of night, away from curious eyes, they began to share stolen hours. Their connection grew stronger, though it was fragile, born out of secrecy and contradiction. Reynolds knew what he was risking: his reputation, his career, even his marriage, but temptation outweighed logic. Behind closed doors, the affair ignited. What began as cautious meetings became a dangerous addiction neither of them could fully control. Alicia, young and idealistic, believed she could keep it separate from the rest of her life. Reynolds, on the other hand, lived in constant conflict. Each embrace pulled him deeper into something he despised himself for, even as he longed for it more. He became obsessed with keeping it hidden, making sure no trace of their relationship leaked into the open. But in a neighborhood where everyone watches, secrets are difficult to protect. Subtle signs began to spark whispers. Neighbors noticed Reynolds leaving Alicia's house late at night, or the way their eyes lingered too long when passing each other on the street. A curtain would shift, a conversation would pause, and rumors would ripple quietly from porch to porch. Some dismissed it as speculation, but others began to connect the dots. The pressure tightened around them, though neither wanted to admit it. The thrill of secrecy gave way to the creeping fear of exposure. Reynolds's paranoia grew sharper each day, his temper shorter, his sense of control slipping. For Alicia, the affair was complicated but intoxicating, a secret passion she thought she could handle. Yet beneath the surface, tension was building, silent but steady, waiting for the moment when it would erupt into something neither could contain. The weight of secrecy began to press down harder with each passing week. What had once been a thrill for Mark Reynolds now felt like a trap tightening around him. He could no longer look at his fellow officers without imagining their reactions if they discovered the truth. The men he worked beside every day were proud of their prejudices, unashamed of their slurs and cruel jokes. To them, respect was tied to maintaining an image of superiority. If they knew he was secretly involved with Alicia Turner, the young black woman across the street, his career and reputation would crumble in an instant. Reynolds knew this, and yet he couldn't walk away. At home, his wife noticed the change before anyone else. She felt the distance in his touch, the distraction in his eyes, the way he lingered too long outside in the evenings. She asked questions he deflected with irritation, blaming work stress or long hours at the station. The excuses piled up, but the silence between them grew louder with each passing day. The man she thought she knew was slipping further away, though she couldn't see the storm that truly consumed him. For Alicia, the cracks began to show in a different way. She was used to challenges, used to pushing forward despite obstacles, but something about the affair was taking a toll. She started finding strange notes left under her door. The handwriting was messy, the words sharp and cruel. They warned her to stop, to leave, to remember her place. At first, she ignored them, tossing the scraps into the trash, but the pattern continued. More notes appeared, each one darker than the last. Then came the nights when cars slowed to a crawl outside her house. Headlights lingered, engines idled, and then just as quickly they disappeared into the darkness. Alicia couldn't tell if it was coincidence or something more sinister. Sometimes she thought she saw shadows moving just beyond her windows, watching. The fear gnawed at her, though she kept it hidden. She told no one, not even Reynolds. Deep down, she suspected he might be behind the intimidation, trying to frighten her into ending things before the truth came out. But ending it wasn't simple. Despite the threats, despite the unease, the connection between them continued. Their nights together carried an intensity that blurred reason and caution. Each meeting pulled them further into danger, binding them with secrecy that neither could untangle. Reynolds was trapped between desire and hatred, his emotions spiraling into obsession. He wanted her, but he also feared her power to ruin everything he had built. The tension in the neighborhood grew just as steadily. People whispered in hushed voices, exchanging knowing glances. They didn't have proof, but they didn't need it. The air felt charged, heavy with suspicion. Something was unfolding behind closed doors, and everyone seemed to sense it. For Reynolds, every day became a battle to maintain control. He tried to bury the fear with discipline, tried to hide behind the badge, but paranoia grew stronger than logic. The more he tried to push Alicia away, the more he was pulled back into her orbit. The secrecy that once thrilled him was now suffocating, building pressure that was certain to explode. The summer heat seemed heavier that year, clinging to every surface, thick and oppressive. For Mark Reynolds, it felt like the walls were closing in. His carefully maintained double life was beginning to crumble, and no amount of discipline or authority could stop it. By July, he was a man unraveling, his paranoia feeding on itself. He imagined whispers in every conversation, suspicious looks in every passing glance. At the station, when his fellow officers laughed together, he was certain they were mocking him. At home, his wife's growing suspicion cut deeper each day. And across the street, Alicia Turner lived her life as if nothing had changed, unaware of just how unstable he had become. The breaking point arrived without warning. One humid night, Reynolds sat alone in his patrol car, parked on a quiet side street, staring at his phone. Messages from Alicia filled the screen, each one sharper than the last. She was tired of secrecy, tired of being hidden away like a mistake. She hinted at telling the truth, at no longer protecting him from the consequences of their affair. Every word felt like a threat. His heart pounded as anger and fear fused into one overwhelming impulse. He couldn't let her speak. If she did, his career, his marriage, his reputation, everything would collapse in an instant. That night, long after the neighborhood had gone still, Reynolds crossed the street to Alicia's house. The air buzzed with cicadas, but the silence between the hums felt heavy, ominous. He entered her home with the familiarity of someone who had been there many times before, but this time his steps were sharper, his presence colder. Alicia confronted him as soon as he arrived. Her frustration, bottled up for too long, poured out in a rush. But Reynolds wasn't listening. All he heard were threats to his fragile world, words that confirmed his darkest fears. The argument escalated quickly, voices rising and breaking through the thin walls of the small house. Neighbors later recalled hearing muffled sounds, though none acted in the moment. Inside, the confrontation turned physical. Reynolds's rage, stoked by weeks of fear and resentment, erupted. What followed was a violent struggle, desperate and chaotic. Alicia fought back, but Reynolds was consumed by a determination that had crossed into madness. In that final moment, he silenced the very person he once claimed to need. By dawn, Alicia's lifeless body lay in her own home, the walls bearing witness to the brutality of the night before. Her dreams, her ambitions, her laughter, all cut short in a single act of desperation. The quiet street, once a picture of suburban calm, transformed into a crime scene wrapped in flashing lights and yellow tape. Neighbors stepped out of their houses in shock, whispering in disbelief as paramedics carried her away. Reynolds returned to his role as the respected officer that morning, blending into the scene he had created. He stood among the investigators, feigning horror at the tragedy. But evidence doesn't lie forever. Every detail he thought he controlled, every step he believed was hidden, would soon unravel, dragging him into the spotlight he feared most. The investigation began almost immediately, the kind of case that demanded answers quickly. Alicia Turner was young, ambitious, and beloved by those who knew her. The brutality of her death shocked the community, turning her home into a place of mourning. Detectives moved swiftly, combing through her house for any clue that might explain what had happened. What they found told a story far different from the image Mark Reynolds worked so hard to protect. Surveillance footage from nearby homes revealed his car parked outside Alicia's house on the night of her murder. The timestamp left no room for doubt. Neighbors came forward, recalling how they had seen him slipping across the street at odd hours or leaving just before dawn. Their suspicions, once dismissed as gossip, now became part of the official record. What had been whispered in private was suddenly spoken aloud under oath. Forensic evidence built the case even further. Fibers from Reynolds's clothing were found in Alicia's home, and traces of his DNA appeared in places that confirmed more than a casual visit. Investigators also uncovered a series of text messages between the two, messages that painted a clear picture of a hidden relationship unraveling. They revealed nights of longing, afternoons of secrecy, and most importantly, arguments laced with threats. Alicia had grown tired of being hidden, while Reynolds grew more desperate to maintain control. Those digital records were the final nail in the coffin of his carefully maintained facade. The arrest stunned the neighborhood. The officer they had trusted, the man who represented safety, was suddenly led away in handcuffs. Cameras captured the moment, the flash of lights illuminating his blank stare as he was escorted into custody. For some, it was vindication, the confirmation of rumors they had long suspected. For others, it was betrayal. How could the man sworn to protect them have been capable of something so monstrous? At trial, the story unraveled in public. Prosecutors laid out the evidence in painful detail, reconstructing the timeline of the affair and the night it ended in violence. The jury heard about the secret meetings, the threats, and the obsession that consumed Reynolds. They saw the messages, read the notes, and listened to expert testimony that confirmed Alicia had fought for her life. Every piece of the puzzle revealed him not as a protector, but as a predator who let hatred and fear drive him to murder. The defense tried to paint a different picture, suggesting passion had clouded his judgment, that it was a crime of impulse rather than intent. But the weight of evidence was too heavy, and the jury saw through the attempt. The verdict came swiftly, guilty on all counts. When the sentence was read, the courtroom was silent. Reynolds, once respected and feared, was condemned to spend the rest of his life behind bars. The badge he once wore with pride became a symbol of betrayal. His name, once associated with authority, now stood as a warning of the dangers that can hide behind polished uniforms and suburban smiles. The neighborhood never fully recovered. Alicia's house became a reminder of a life cut short, a bright future stolen in a moment of violence. For years afterward, the story lingered, whispered in quiet tones by those who still lived on the street. It was proof that beneath the surface of ordinary lives, darkness can grow unchecked until it explodes into tragedy.